1 o'clock. So I'd like to formally welcome everybody to our webinar today. Today's topic is customer journey mapping, the key to unlocking customer excellence. And certainly by the number of attendees we've already got online, it certainly seems to be a very popular topic. I'm delighted to welcome two brand new speakers to our webinar program. Delighted to welcome Richard Hammond from Uncrowned. And Richard, you're a customer analytics business, so you're sort of very much into mapping the customer journey.
Very much so. It's key to understanding how you can build out great customer experiences.
Excellent. And Richard will be sharing some of his thoughts about journey mapping and also removing some of the roadblocks. And also delighted to welcome Andre Smit from West to his first webinar with us. Welcome, Andre.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
And you're going to be looking at some of the way that customer care is in transition and the way that journey mapping can help in that.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Wonderful. Well, a little bit of housekeeping. If you want to get a copy of today's webinar and watch the replay, I know a lot of you do like to share these, particularly these strategic topics with your management teams. So callcenterhelper.com/recorded webinars will be available from later on this afternoon. If you're not already logged into our chat room, we've got quite a large number of people already. Callcenterhelper.com/chat. It is in a slightly different window from the main presentation. So if your screen's big enough, put your chat on one side, the main webinar slides on the other. And we've got quite a lot of detail that we've got. Richard has a template built into his slides. And so it's quite detailed. So if you'd like to see that in more detail, downloading the slides is quite good. You can click on this link here. And there's also quite a lot of detail on Andre's slide. So that might make it easier to follow overall. And there is another added advantage of being in the webinar, in the chat room, is that you can ask questions if you'd like to use hashtag question for question or hashtag tip for tip. And we have a prize for the best tip. So it could be, if you like, this rather nice bottle of Brut Reserve champagne, or if you prefer a box of chocolates or an Amazon gift card, we could arrange that. I'll be drawing the best tip live at the end of today's webinar. And I'd just like to kick things off with a quick poll on customer journey mapping. When was the last time that you carried out customer journey mapping? Was it in the past week? Was it in the past month? Was it in the past year? Was it in the past 5 years? Or have you never actually carried out customer journey mapping? I think it's going to be very interesting. Richard, any thoughts on who's going to be the winner on this one?
Yes, thoughts on where the winner might be, but also thoughts about where the winner should be. I think we might find that we're not measuring it as often as we should. But you know, we can change that.
Okay, well let's have a look at the results, and sort of seeing quite a polarization here. 19% excellent in the last week, 25% in the past month. That's certainly much higher than when I last asked this question a couple of years ago. 25% in the past year, and about 30% haven't done anything in the past year. Andre, any surprises on that for you?
Actually, no, not at all. This is very typical, I see, of the landscape that we have out there today.
Indeed. Well, if you're wondering about customer journey mapping, there is a masterclass available on customer journey mapping, which will be held in Birmingham in the UK on the 15th of November. We've put the link here on the bottom of the slides. We'll also put that link into the chat room as well. So if you wanted to register for that, that would work well. So I think probably it's the best time now to pass the baton across to you, Richard. And if you'd like to share with us your thoughts on how to get the best out of customer journey mapping.
Thank you, John T. We'll bring up this first slide for everybody. Just to sort of place in context where I'm coming from in this subject, I started as a retailer. I've been a retailer for 33 years, been a consultant in retailing for about 20 of that. But there's been a change in the relationship between vendors and customers. So everything from retail to service providers, subscription providers, utilities, government, that has changed so significantly that where in retail we've always perhaps had a measure of having to apply technology to understanding that relationship, we've been catapulted into the future, and that's kind of where I'm coming from. The two books that you see there are the two books that I've written so far. Smart Retail is in its 4th edition, 20 languages, sells all over the world, which my mum loves me to say because she's very impressed, but it's a product of understanding the best practice in retailing, and consequently the last edition has very much been the best practice in understanding how to bring the customer to our way of thinking. The new book, Friction and Reward, is out in December and January, and this one might be very relevant to a number of you guys listening today. It deals very specifically with the customer journey and with a way of looking at customer journey that kind of takes us forward. So I'm going to look at 3 things over the next 25 to 30 minutes. Customer journey mapping in general, but we've got a particular way of approaching it that might be useful, particularly for those of you who voted in the top 2 categories of that poll, and that was great to see. We're going to talk about first visit advantage, which is one of the products of great customer journey mapping, and then specifically we'll focus on a couple of examples of how reducing friction in the customer journey can have quite significant results with customers. So first of all, let's get into the meat of it. Call centers matter. Now, you'd expect me to put a crowd-pleasing slide up early, but actually it's true. In the new paradigm, the new relationship between vendors and customers, any opportunity to have empathetic connections between customers and the brand is not just valuable, it's even more valuable than it ever has been in the past. And call centers are a really key part of that relationship and that opportunity. And I think as a result, we'll start to see over the next 3-5 years, even more emphasis on the quality and opportunity that we provide to customers through call center contact. There's been a seismic shift in power between vendors and customers. And that seismic shift, I'll plot for you in a moment how that's come about. But essentially, what has happened is in the past, vendors, we were able to dictate a little bit. We were able to create structures, stores, contracts that worked broadly for us. We did things in the way that worked for us. And customers would kind of have to decide whether they dipped into that or not. The change that we've seen comes about because customers now have massive visibility of choice. Customers understand their options like never before, but at the same time, something else has happened which has served to completely change our relationship, and that's that customers now also have safe and easy access to those choices. So they're much more aware than they ever have been of the choice range that's available to them, and they can get to that choice far more easily. So if you're a manufacturing company in the Midlands and you've been having your widgets manufactured for you by a local foundry, and that's been a relationship you've always had, well, you now know not only are there foundries in China that can perhaps produce that item for you at a higher standard at a lower cost, you can access that output in an insured, secured, easy way. And in retail, we see that time and again in communications, in mobile phones, for example, where not only have we got massive choice, but regulatory pressure has made it trivially easy for customers to transfer that choice to somebody else. And we see that across all sorts of industries. The result is customers now control the relationship. And when that happens, when customers are in charge, you have to start looking at a different understanding of how you create an experience that's going to engage them, because it is now trivially easy for a customer to choose away from your brand to an alternative. Now, it turns out there are 2 factors that are really important in customer preference, in customers choosing you as a vendor. The first is friction. Quite simply, the amount of effort a customer has to put in to doing business with you, whether that be as a retail customer or as a business-to-business relationship a utility relationship, a government, whatever it might be. Friction is the effort a customer has to go through to get to your solution to their problem. Now, some of us have kind of stopped there in our customer service design and our customer journey mapping. But if you only look at friction, and I'll tell you exactly why this is in a second or two with a couple of examples. If you only look at friction, you just get half the story. Because the other massive factor in customers' decision making is what we call reward. I don't mean reward schemes, although they are part of that. I mean everything that a customer gets from interacting with a vendor in a particular way. So it might be a vendor that has a call center team that take a lot of the paperwork and processing away from the customer. That would count as a reward side item, something that as a result of doing business with that organization or that brand makes my life more fulfilled as a customer. If it makes my life easier, it's a friction side element. Now, leading on from that, we've also, in that seismic change, had a change to the way this word loyalty works. I've always been very skeptical about customer loyalty in general, with one exception. Customer loyalty to brands can be very clear and very plain. Two people can have a fist fight over whether they prefer a Samsung telephone or an Apple telephone. They can have a fist fight over whether they drink Coca-Cola or Pepsi. They tend not to have that fist fight over which business communications company has provided them with that mobile telephone, which retailer has sold them that can of Coke. So if we can't command real kind of from the heart loyalty, as vendors, what can we do? Well, we can get to a situation where our customer experience delivers something that I call first visit advantage. And first visit advantage is a very straightforward idea. It's that customers will give you the first bite of the cherry. So back in that example of the widgets and the engineering business in the Midlands, if the local foundry has worked hard in its customer experience to get first visit advantage, that foundry may still go to China, may still go to Indonesia to have that thing made, but they'll give that local foundry the first opportunity because there are low friction and high reward benefits to them in doing so. In very physical, pragmatic expressions, first visit advantage means that your app is the one that the customer opens first. Your website is the website the customer visits first. Physical retail, your store, your customer parks at that end of the mall, or they get the bus and they get off the bus at the stop that's nearest you. Now, if you get first visit advantage, up to 80% of customer needs will be met by the first interaction that customer has really had. So an interaction is something that's a bit more than just looking at something on a website or looking at something in a catalogue. It's that first time they really start to believe that this vendor or this product is the right combination for them. So how do we use this change in customer journey mapping and in customer experience building? Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to essentially question everything. We have to not accept in the way that we perhaps once did that our processes are paramount, that there's a reason why we do things this way, and that's just what customers are going to have to put up with. Because the truth is, customers won't put up with it any longer. Customers will choose away from you as trivially as a click, and will find a safe alternative to us. But that's a good thing, because it means, particularly in your industry, particularly call centers, who are very customer focused anyway, who are as frustrated sometimes as customers are themselves by bad process or by challenging ways of achieving a particular goal. So if we can move away from that, if we can get customer championing people to look at customer journey in a way that unearths and surfaces those opportunities to change, then we're really onto something. If customers are in charge, and if friction and reward are the two significant drivers of preference, we have a very straightforward choice, which is to make every engagement with customers, particularly call centers, particularly physical, particularly wherever there's a transfer of value between us and the customer before a transaction is completed, we need to make those engagements either incredibly easy or extraordinarily brilliant, or both. Easy, low friction, brilliant, high reward. That means our interactions need to have at their heart an understanding of what friction means and what reward means. And in a moment, I'm going to give you some practical examples of both of those things. And later on in this session, I'm going to give you a template that Jonty mentioned earlier on that you can use to run some very straightforward, top line, very simple customer journey mapping with friction and reward at their heart. So quick examples of low friction. Low friction distinct from high reward. Low friction has a beneficial default, which is that when a customer has two vendor choices and neither vendor choice actually offers very much in the way of reward, the customer will almost always default to the lowest friction alternative. Now, what I've pictured for you there are Amazon's innovative dash buttons. And the dash button is a great invention. It runs right away from customer retail to stationery supply to food supply and now pharmacy and all kinds of areas that Amazon are getting into. The dash button is the ultimate expression of low friction. A dash button is a simple one-click device that lives in your house that once clicked generates an order for the product that's printed on that dash button. Now, this is actually my dash button here, and you'll see it's for Brabrantia, and it's for bin bags, bin liners. And I feel liberated that I will never buy another bin liner in my entire life. Whenever the bin liners look like they're low, that this thing sits under the sink, click, bin liners magically turn up tomorrow. Now, you know, bin liners is a very prosaic item, but we can apply this to so many things that we supply to customers on a subscription or a regular or a basis, on an obvious basis. If we are the only option, if we're the only low friction option, then customers will default to that. But bin liners is a really interesting example. So throwing rubbish away isn't just about putting it into a container these days, it's about recycling. It's about having the easy tools at work particularly, and at home as well, to be able to separate out our product, to be able to find a solution that means that we can get to where we need to get to more easily. And so low friction can be defeated by a reward option. To give you an example of high reward, again from retailing, Selfridges. The great thing about Selfridges is that this is a building where all of the product in it can either be bought for less or more easily elsewhere. And yet Selfridges is extremely successful because the reward is high, because the experience is extraordinary, because the empathetic human interaction between people is powerful and positive. So here's that chart I promised you of friction and reward variables. And you'll notice that I've called out 2 or 3 there that are very relevant. Friction variables are anything that gets in the way in the customer journey, that gets in the way of the customer fulfilling their particular needs. So an obvious one from this industry would be navigation of call. So navigation, getting through to the person who can provide the solution, can be a challenge sometimes, can be, and there's some real kind of value there for us in understanding exactly how that journey works, that part of the process. But equally, and
Richard, if anyone wanted to get hold of, because there's quite a lot of detail on there of your slides there, just a reminder that they can get that from the chat room, which is at callcenterhelper.com/chat, and then there's all the detail they need is there.
Absolutely, definitely. So, you know, all those friction variables in tiny little text on the screen there. That's not even an exhaustive list. There are other things that we can find to get right. But if you start to understand the impact of each one of these on your customer journey, then you can start to do something about it. On the reward variables side of the equation, call center quality becomes really, really important, because it's one of those opportunities for us to build that empathetic relationship with customers before purchase, during purchase, after purchase, in ownership, in research, and all sorts of areas, in solving problems, helping customers to get the best out of whatever it is that particular vendor is selling to them. And that really drives us into a kind of a new opportunity for call centers, an area that I know that as an industry you're already starting to make really positive movements within, which is looking at call center as a positive place in which to build customer relationships. And I think that's going to become more and more important as we progress with these vendor relationships. And of course, product knowledge, guided experiences, retail theatre, transparency, localism, all of those are also variables that sit on the reward side. So what I'm going to do now is taking some of that big chunk of kind of download that I've given you there and give you some real examples of friction reward in action of something called peak end effect. And peak end effect is really relevant for individual call center calls, and you'll see why in a second. We'll look at where you can do the first visit advantage, and we'll look at how all that works in the context of customer journey. So I'm 48 years old, and it feels like a confession this. I'm 48 years old, and I bought my first pair of Dr. Martens 7 months ago. And it's the classic Dr. Martens. They're a beautiful, deep black colour. They're the 9-hole version. My customer journey with my Dr. Martens is fascinating, though, because it goes something like this. I get the shoes, then I break the shoes in, and then after I break the shoes in, I'm a delighted customer. But look at those individual touch points of that customer journey. This is a very simplified customer journey map for obvious reasons, but the first part of the journey is getting the shoes. But the second part, those shoes lacerated my feet. My feet physically bled. Now think about that in a customer experience context. Who among us would design a customer experience that includes physically hurting the customer? But Dr. Martens, a rite of passage is that breaking in process. Now after that breaking in process, and honestly, it was really painful, it was very uncomfortable for a number of weeks. But I knew I wanted these Dr. Martens. I really wanted, they looked great, and I wanted to get past that. The reward for me was gigantic. It was huge. The friction was physical damage to my feet. But now I walk around in my Dr. Martens and I feel $1 million, and my feet are so comfortable. I've never had a more comfortable pair of shoes. But look at how we would have attacked that in traditional customer journey mapping. We would have isolated each one of those touch points and said, okay, obtaining the product is fine. Customers are telling us afterwards they're very happy with the product. They're getting exactly what they want from it. But in the middle, whoop, 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 there's this big alarm. We're making people physically hurt. We're making their feet bleed. And what we would do traditionally is we'd say, well, we need to tackle that friction point on its own, that pain point, literal pain point. And what we would do is we would perhaps make the shoes from a thinner, more pliable leather. We might take a couple of eyelets off so they're lower down, they don't rub the back of your foot quite so much. We might change the profile of the sole. But in doing so, we destroy the product. We would break the reason for that product to exist. And this shows you a critical consideration that we have to make, which is understanding what we're actually measuring within the customer journey. The right metric is essential. And I know you've published a number of articles in Call Center Help magazine over the last couple of months that talk about exactly this subject, about getting the right metrics in place. This is a great example. This is my actual bus that I had to get on this morning to get the train to get into the studio, the number 2 bus in Oxford. Now, I catch that bus every morning to get on the train to come into London. The easy metric to measure there is the time it takes me to walk from my house to the bus stop. And that average is about 9 minutes. Sometimes it's 8, sometimes it's 10, but it's an average of about 9 minutes. We have a tendency to say, okay, that's an easy thing to measure. And we can manage that. We can persuade Richard to walk faster. We can get him to walk slower. We can influence that metric. But that metric tells you nothing about the quality of my journey. Because if you think about it, the metric that's useful isn't time from house to bus stop. It's time from house to sitting on a bus that's about to go to the station. And that's critical, that difference, because the right metric there is a conflagration of 2 separate metrics. And you'll see from the side of the bus there that particular service runs every 10 minutes, but no bus is predictable in that way. There's no way to say it will definitely be there at 5 to and 10 to, whatever it might be. So we have to allow within our customer journey mapping some understanding of what is the actual thing that makes a difference to how the customers feel about us as a call center and how they feel about us as a brand and as a vendor. Great example of an industry, of a business that understands that perfectly is Changi Airport in Singapore. Changi Airport is the world's favorite airport, as voted for by an incredible survey that measures the opinions of 13 million customers every year. It's got some crazy title like the Airport Satisfaction Happiness a vector guide, or whatever it might be. It's a crazy long title. But Changi is #1. And Changi is #1, even though it isn't the most efficient airport in the world. It isn't the quickest to transit through. And you think as a metric, well, speed of getting in and out and through the airport, that's what customers are going to want, surely. What's really interesting here is the world's most efficient airports, the one that gets you from arrival to your plane the fastest, is Atlanta Hartsfield. And Atlanta Hartsfield is only 50th on this particular survey. And that's because what Changi have understood is the metric that's important, the friction that's important in an airport transfer, and airport transfers are critical to the profitability of this industry. The metric that's important is not time, it's stress. If we can give a passenger a lower stress experience as they transit our airport, they will tell us they enjoyed this experience more. So literally, as you walk through Changi, there are hanging gardens, indoor hanging gardens, with signs up that say, please sit down a while, watch the butterflies, enjoy our greenery and nature. It's phenomenal, staggering, incredibly expensive, a huge investment, but worth every penny, because customers measure that airport not in time progressed, but in stress reduced. And that's made Changi one of the most successful transit airports on the planet. And transit traffic is where the money is made in airports now. It's not just what people spend when they're in airports, and it's not just the retail part of it, it's the transfer traffic. And Atlanta Hartsfield sits down there in 50th. So that brings us to, and we're getting close to kind of the meat of this, and that brings us to peak end memory effect. And peak end memory effect is something which will be really interesting to build into some of your considerations of call experiences. What peak end memory effect does is it tells you how we remember things, and it tells you whether we remember them as positive or negative. Peak is an emotional peak that happens at some point through that experience. You can have a number of negative peaks, but as long as you have a positive peak that outstrips those negative peaks, an emotional peak, and as long as the ending is emotionally positive, even though you might have had lots of problem moments in there, negative peaks, the customer's memory of it is positive. Let's give you an example of how an organization uses that incredible effect in their customer journey. This is a real picture of queues in a Disney park. Now, if any of you out there have been to Disney in the last 20 years, you've had friends that have been there, ask them a question or ask yourself a question, think back on the experience. Ask about queues. So ask, what were the queues like? And people will tell you they were murder, nightmarish. We got into a fight. Mum and dad aren't talking to each other. You know, we've missed out on some of the rides we wanted to get to. Oh, it was overwhelming. Then ask them about the food. And I said, oh, the food, it was rubbish. It was, you know, even for American junk food standard, it was poor. Ask them about the hotel. It was kind of disappointing, actually. It wasn't the experience. Then ask them, how was your day? And customers will tell you this one word. They will tell you their day was magical. Now, from a CX design perspective, from a customer journey, from a customer mapping perspective, that's maddening. How can you deliver such horrific peaks and customers still rate your experience with them as magical? It's because what Disney understands is that investing in queuing wouldn't contribute to customers' overall perception of the day. Because what matters to customers in that experience is that every kid gets their 10 minutes with Goofy. Is that a Disney princess comes and says something life-affirming to their child, that child remembers for the rest of their life. That the end of the day is a spectacular show, that everybody goes away thinking this was grand and beautiful and magical. That means that Disney can get away with bad food, it can get away with huge queuing. And so Disney invests all of that money into training great people, making sure that Disney princess knows not just what to say, but how to say it, when to say it, why to say it. Putting that emphasis into that experience makes such a critical difference. Now, I'm not going to go through the detail of these templates for you here, because you can download a copy of this presentation and get a chance to get into the detail. But I'll just give you a few clues as to how to get the best out of it for your own customer experiences. So think about, first of all, customer mission. What's the customer trying to achieve with you as a business? What channel are they doing that through? Are they starting on your web channel? Are they moving through a physical channel? Are they going through a call center channel exclusively? Description, get as much of the description there as you possibly can, because some of the clues as to what you need to do will be in that description. Then the meat of this process is three things. It's first of all touch points, and then it's either side of touch points, frictions and rewards. And you can refer to that list that I put up in an earlier slide to help you identify what those frictions and rewards might be. The first part of the process, and this is critical, is to identify, that's not even a real word, is to identify the touch points that your customer on that customer mission will go through in resolving whatever problem it is they're trying to solve with you, whatever thing they're trying to obtain is, whatever business need they have that they're trying to solve. Now, touch points are an interesting thing because you can overemphasize and overdivide touch points. We're doing a piece of work at the moment for a financial services institute where, looking at mortgages for first-time buyers, we've identified together 68 separate touch points. And a touch point is anywhere in which the customer essentially encounters you as a brand in a meaningful way. So we've got 68 touch points, but you can't manage against 68 touch points. So we've reduced that to 12 that appear to be critical to the customer's perception of that particular business, positive or negative. So once you've identified all those touch points, and again, you can also do another thing internally here. You can say, let's just look at the touch points through the call center, for example. So you can very usefully isolate a customer journey just for that part of the customer journey. Typically and traditionally, a customer journey starts way, way before the customer even contacts you as a brand. It's when they're thinking about whatever the challenge it is they've got, thinking about the problem they want to solve. So then down that middle column, list all of your touch points. And then either side, think about the specific frictions and rewards that relate to that actual touch point as it presents itself. So for example, I've put up there call wait. Well, you know, we might say our process means that we're always going to have call waiting, but are there ways during a process of call waiting where we can boost the value of that call once the customer comes through that wait, so that the customer feels the wait was worthwhile? For example, and on the flip side, are there ways in which we can apply friction reduction to understand how we can reduce some of those call wait times? So it's not always about saying call waiting is a problem, get rid of call waiting. It's understanding, can we build value that mitigates against that particular touch point if it's a challenging touch point? Oh, did I mute myself then? There we go.
That's fine.
Yes, we're getting close to time. So finally, rank the 5 most significant frictions, rank the 5 most significant rewards, and in doing so, you will have straight away 10 opportunities to transform the customer experience. And I'm going to finish with one particular kind of final point, is that going through this process, it means that we can identify the best possible applications of the work that we do in call centers. It gives us an opportunity to really deliver on that idea that you as human beings, you as empathetic touch points, nodes, are able to transform customer experiences at a time when the customer is in charge of their choice of vendor in any given situation. That makes you very powerful in this process, and that makes you a really interesting force for vendors to use to improve the interaction between customers and to win more customers to their side of the process. And that's my final slide.
Thank you very much for that, Richard. Some great takeaways there. First visit advantage is certainly a key. I did love the reduce friction, increase reward, or both. I'm not sure that's an either or there. And the call center is certainly a fantastic way of doing that. And I did like the template there about rank your top frictions, rank your top rewards. And certainly if people wanted to get hold of a copy of that template, if they log into the chat room, callcenterhelper.com/chat, and then there's this little link here, download webinar slides, and you can get Richard's template there. I did like the fact that friction and reward is measured in stress, and important to get the peak end memory effect. Make sure you have the peaks are sufficiently large enough to overcome the positive ones, any negative peaks. So I think that's very good. We've had a comment in from Izzy, Richard, who said they visited Shanghai in May, and indeed the experience is amazing of the gardens. Not many cities have an airport like that. So I certainly think it's a big shame that in a lot of airports they've taken out all the seating areas, which help reduce stress, and put shops in their place, which if you're into shopping is fine, but if you actually want to sit down and relax before a flight, not always so good. So that may backfire on those airports. Well, let's have a look, jump across at some of the things that are happening in the chat room. Again, link here, callcenterhelper.com/chat.
Yeah.
Anna says, consider the customer's emotional need for something as well as the functional need. Put yourself in the customer's shoes. And in a similar approach, Jack, and this, Andrew, I don't know if you got a thought on this one. When mapping the customer journey, it's important to remember that you begin at the customer's start point and not at the company's. So when you're designing the customer journey, focus on the customer's incentives and preferred outcomes, and not the company's.
Yeah, sorry, unmuted myself. So absolutely, this is one of the most important things. I think each one of us likes to feel important when we deal with a vendor or with a bank or whatever it is. And most companies spend so much time, and I'll go through this a little bit later in my session, on how they are viewed by these customers. And the customer loyalty goes hand in hand with that. If you're not viewed well, if you don't design it from the customer up, you lose all that loyalty and everything you've garnered from all the other things you spent money on.
Yeah, and I can see that with simple things like there's a ferry company that I use quite frequently, and it's got very busy over the summer, and so it's getting quite difficult to get a cabin. But on their website, they've built everything of which ferry do you want to go on. You go through the whole procedure, and then you find at the end there's no cabin, and you have to spend about half an hour doing the whole exercise to find the one that's got a cabin space, perhaps 3 days later. So it's, again, the customer journey has been built for the company's convenience rather than necessarily for the traveller's convenience. And yet, when you phone the contact centre, they've often got great access on which crossings have got space. So there's a question. Angel says, do you have any advice for mapping the employee experience along with the customer experience? Richard, I don't know if you've had any thoughts of employee experience?
Yeah, it's absolutely vital, and it's a great question, because the easiest way to generate great customer outcomes are to start by generating great employee outcomes. There's a thing called the service profit chain, which shows you a direct model that links, almost step for step, how happy, engaged, and motivated employees are with how happy, motivated, and engaged in your brand customers are. I like to reflect whatever you're doing for the customer, to reflect that in its full quality and detail for employees. So if you're running a full customer mapping process, do exactly the same thing with employees. And again, as one of the previous commenters just mentioned, start that before the employee's even thinking of coming to work for you. So how do they perceive you as an employer right from the outside? If they then decide, and map all of those steps through to perhaps them retiring or moving on in their career at the end of it, and apply the same analysis. What things make it hard for them to work for you? What things make them want to stay with you?
Indeed, and tying with the thoughts on Disney, Mark said, I went to Disney last year and the overall experience was magical. I agree, the interval touch points like queuing were an issue, but he's right that the staff were amazing and made the experience magical, which is great. Susie says, prioritize your customer expectations because it's unrealistic for you to meet the expectations of every customer. Simple post-it notes will work for doing this. So Richard, I did like your template. I thought that was also quite a good way of prioritizing. Andre, Susie says, you'll never be able to determine each and every customer needs, you'll have to create an experience that works for most customers and make sure you have the resource to deal with the small pot of tricky specialist customers. Any advice for our readers on this one?
I think the big thing here is to have this customer experience to be personal. That whole personal touch that you have in this actually gets away from so many of the little corner cases you have in the customer experience. If that experience that they have with you is not that personal and not contextual, where they don't understand what you're dealing with, you run into trouble right up front. But just having that little personal touches and the magic, the Disney experience and all the other things, what happens in Changi, it's all about that personal touch. That gets rid of all these other corner cases, and you're serving pretty much everybody through that.
Indeed. We've got a couple more tips in. Izzy says, map your entire customer communication points, email, chat, calls, etc., to understand where improvements of the customer pain points are needed, and to innovate and redesign the customer journey if needed. Certainly the handoff points between those channels, email, chat, website, calls, often aren't well joined up, and I know you're going to be touching on that later, Andre. And Amanthis says, form a panel of customers or clients, including detractors, passives, and promoters, and invite them to share experience with co-workers. I quite like this, Richard, in that you get the panel, but also you bring in some of the employees to sort of pass some of those messages. Some of that can be quite powerful in terms of the unofficial communication paths back into the organization.
Whenever we do a format development project, for example, we always form a core panel made up of employees and customers. And when we use employees, we always make sure it's the employees who face the customer every day. So we don't want the marketing director on it. We don't want the chief exec. We want cashiers. We want call center people. We want people who are talking to customers all the time. They often are the ones who instinctively know what the customer's roadblock is, or the customer's real desire is, and can solve things that we sometimes spend years looking at.
Indeed. Well, just before we jump across to Andre's presentation, just want to have a look at investment priorities. It's certainly we're in for potentially some quite big changing times going through. I'd just like to get a level, perhaps if you pick top 2 or top 3, what are your top investment priorities? Is it things like new channels, bringing in, say, live chat or video? Is it personalization? Is it increasing the take-up of things like self-service or new self-service options? Are you looking at improving customer feedback, or perhaps you're looking at deploying something like or improving your knowledge base? If you've got any options that aren't on the list, we can only have 5 options. Perhaps if you'd like to share that into the chat room. This is quite interesting, the feedback we're coming through here. Sample size of 116. Let me just share the results here. And Andre, it looks like self-service is top of the list, followed by new channels, and then really quite evenly knowledge-based customer feedback and personalization. So so a different range. So I guess that a lot of these have a technology angle to them. So it's probably a good time, Andre, to pass the baton across to you. And if you'd like to share your thoughts on the role of customer technology in journey mapping.
Absolutely, and thank you for that, John T, and thank you for Richard for a great presentation. A little bit about myself before we start out. I'm the President of International Sales and Channels at West. Previous to West, I spent 24 years of my career at Cisco. Many of you might know Cisco Systems, the biggest networking vendor in the world. In the last 4 years, I led their collaboration business globally. So quite a bit of experience. From the accent, you can hear I'm South African, but I've lived in Europe for many years. I lived in Asia Pacific for many years, in Singapore actually. Completely agree about the Changi experience. It was my airport hub for 11 years. And the experience was magical every time I went there, and actually a great time for reflection as well. And currently, as you saw on the map in the start, I live in California, so it's actually coming to a reasonable hour for me, 5:45 in the morning. So with that, let me give you our vision for this entire customer care experience. It needs to be personal. It needs to be contextual. This contextual piece, extremely important. It is that knowledge-based understanding what the customer needs are, before you even start talking to them. And most importantly, this has to be effortless as to go forward. Now, here is the interesting stat. If we look at our research, and we have got thousands of customers, what inspires loyalty to a company? Most people say, I'm more loyal to organizations that are easy and simple to contact. Now, you would think that if this is so important from loyalty perspective, that they are easy to contact and simple to contact, what do you think your customers feel like today? 16% of customers actually rate that digital customer experience, that customer care, that integrated experience with their companies as excellent. 16%, so important, but such a small portion of people are happy with the interaction they have with the companies they deal with today. Now, let's have a look at what is happening in this transition. And it's amazing how this has changed over the years for particular age groups and different people in the world of how you connect with customers. The silent generation, those born before 1944, most of them wanted to have a phone call. That was the way that you contacted them. The baby boomers, still phone calls, but you still started seeing the emergence of electronic messaging. The generation I loosely fall into somewhere in the middle there, is Generation X. You can start seeing with Generation X, and this is most of consumers today, my generation of consumers, you started seeing the emergence of some of the other places here, internet, web chat, and a little bit of social already creeping in there, and smartphone creeping into this as well. The most interesting generation for me is Generation Y. And this is why the world has become so difficult and needs to be so integrated when it comes to customer contact. And the journey becomes so different to map for customers. You're starting to see the emergence of all these different channels of connection. And you see a massive emergence of the smartphone side and social media becoming massively important in this customer care journey. One of the biggest things and most valuable commodities that customers have today, not customers, companies have today, is what we now refer to as referral marketing. The ability to have such a great experience with a company that the consumers or the end users are willing to refer them to other friends and family and colleagues that they work with. And providing the ability to enroll, track, reward, and influence has become massively important. If you look at the business models, the evolution of business models all over the world, you can get somebody like Khloe Kardashian that is close to becoming a billionaire, and she's built an entire business on this referral marketing, social media, and how she interacts through electronic messaging with customers out there without having a single store. So that has become massively important in Generation Y, and this is where most businesses are investing. And for this to be effective, we see the emergence of this omnichannel. And if you look at the state of contact centers today, less than 30% of contact centers, when you connect with your customers and customer care, has actually omnichannel. And as I just spoke about, omnichannel is the connection of all these different types of channels in a way that makes sense and becomes contextual and personal for the customers. Less than 50% are not giving personalized information to the agent of the user that's dialing in. So every call that the agent is receiving is blind. The first time they've spoken to the user, they don't know what their bank account number is, if they're dealing from a banking perspective, they know the customer preferences. The other piece, and this is one that a personal bugbear that I have, but maybe because I'm Generation X, is when I dial into one of these, if I connect into one of these, I hate sitting there just listening to music. I know how long I'm going to wait for it. If I'm waiting too long, my experience goes downhill very quickly, and I hate dealing with a customer. And immediately, the customer reference goes way down. We thought some time ago that AI is going to take over this world, artificial intelligence, but most customer contact centers today believe it's there to support the agents rather than replace the agents. It's a massive change there. And as I spoke about earlier, web chat, social media, self-service, you saw from the investment, the poll that was just did, most of you start seeing self-service as a massive part of the customer care journey. And the last one that I'm going to speak about briefly here is that first call resolution. The moment you have to go to a second call, or the user is not satisfied by the engagement they've had and don't get to the answer they want to get to, your results drop significantly. So you have to make sure you resolve it on the very first call every single time. Now, one of the things we're seeing here, and this is where self-care is becoming massively important, is the blurring of lines between the agent and the technology that you have out there. And I'll tell you, most of my engagements that I have today, I would say 90% of all the customer care engagements that I have personally has to do with a self-care type of portal. When I'm on the road and I'm in a new city, my bank texts me and says to me, Andre, you're in London today. Is this transaction you made of money you just withdraw the ATM? Was it you? Are you in London today? So the agent understood, or the mechanism understood, that I was traveling away from my home in California. I'm in the UK. I'm trying to do a transaction. The security systems measures kicked in. They want to make sure that I'm the right person, that I'm there. I answer with a quick yes, and it gives me, and immediately my card is enabled, and it adds additional services in for me. So the entire journey is becoming more self-service, more self-care, but also feels that my bank cares about me. It understands where I am and safeguards and secures my transactions as I go forward. But the most important piece of this is starts adding value-added services to me, like what my bank balance is and all kinds of different other things into this. Now, as we look at this differentiated customer care experience, the most important thing here, and we talked about this, is humanizing and empowering the agents that you connect to. Then you have to notify and respond to the different queries they have. Integrated, the omnichannel being integrated and engaging is massively strategic to them, and you have to be able to differentiate from all the other providers that are out there. And this entire journey and differentiating this experience is key to successful customer care engagement. And this is my second last slide I'm going to leave you with. As you design this platform for customers, there are so many facets that are important in this design. We thought for the last couple of years that IVR was going to disappear. We're actually seeing IVR becoming more important in the self-service world. We're starting to get to a point where a voice platform and speech services, speech recognition becomes important. For most of you that for the last couple of minutes had to suffer through my South African accent, we are getting to a world where speech recognition is so sophisticated that it can even pick up on my accent. If you look at Alexa in the home through Amazon, if you look at what Google has done in this world, speech services have become so important and so sophisticated that I no longer have to do type 3, type 5 on my phone. Most of the interaction becomes more personal to recognition of my speech and contextual awareness of what I do. That visual voice part is important. The other thing that's started happening is the contact centers are being built more in the cloud than on large premises. So we're starting to see the emergence of agents sitting all over the world. No longer you're rooted to an agent in the Philippines or in India or Malaysia or some other place in the world. You actually get to a place where people are on second careers all over the world, working from home, that are connected to the contact center and become agents for a company. Gives a localized personal experience. Nothing better than when you dial in and you're from Michigan, Ohio, and you've got this accent, and the agent and the system recognizes you and connects you to the closest agent that is close to you, that creates a localized, personalized experience for you through this contact center, this cloud contact center. The other piece of this is the emergence of cost saving, where you can burst into other providers as a provider here when you get high volume in your contact center itself. Proactive notifications and mobility. That is where self-service is a key player. That multi-channel notifications, SMS, text conversations, and preference management through contextual awareness. Through all of this, we're starting to see investment in big data, the true understanding of the customers and how they connect into this customer experience. And all of this comes together in the customer experience design and support for customer experience centers. So last plug, of course, we sponsor this event today. So I'm going to do a little plug for West itself in this. West has been around for some time. Now, when you talk about customer care and customer contact, the things that you don't think about immediately is other services around this as well. So for example, in the US, and West is a global company, in the US, 85% of all 911 calls are routed through West's network. 911, I would say, is probably the top echelon of customer care. When you dial into an emergency call center, you want to make sure your experience is not just handled well, but it's critical. So we have built a base, from the base up, we've built experience for the most critical of customer care, which is emergency calls. We've got 7.5 billion multi-channel messages that get sent out annually, and over 250 customer contact center customers. With that, I'll hand you over back to the team. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much for that, Andre. Some key learning points there. Customer care is in transition. It was fascinating to see the very strong graph there on the preference that Generation Y has for internet and live chat, and how that's changing quite dramatically. 61% of customers hate not knowing their queue wait time. So a quick takeaway would be to actually put on an anticipated wait time for people, so at least they then they have the power of control whether they want to wait 20 minutes or come back, or whether you want to offer them a different option, for instance, a callback. And there are blurred lines between the agent and the technology. Well, let's have a quick look at the chat room at some of the tips coming in. Angel says, know your key drivers of customer satisfaction, and you give your employees that training, tools, and support to deliver the best customer experience. I certainly think training, Andre, you had on your slide that one of the key drivers to make things better was training. We've had a tip from Susie, who says, create customer promises when redesigning your experience and try to uphold each promise every touch point of the journey. These promises should be passed on to marketing so that customers get the experience that they expect. I really love this. This is as an arrangement. And Richard, do you think customers' promises would work well?
It's a great idea. I mean, brand is all about setting up and creating a promise and then delivering on it. So it's very consistent with that.
Excellent. Jane says telephony becomes even more important as customers use multiple channels because it has the human interaction, which is critical. I think that's very good. Izzy said mobile apps supporting call from app and chat integration is crucial in the global business. No customers will dial international numbers anymore. I think that's a very good approach. And Peter says, remember to treat your team and partners around the business as customers too. So consider their experience and journey equally. So some great advice on that. Well, we're reaching the top of the hour now. But just a reminder, if you would like to attend a service design and customer journey mapping masterclass, there'll be one in Birmingham on the 15th of November. I'm actually out of the country that week, so I'm not going to be able to attend, but that looks a great approach there. And you can find that on the events page of Call Center Helper. Just before we leave, in one or two words, if you'd like to put in to give us our own feedback on our own customer journey, what did you like best and what did you not like so much about the webinar? And the winning tip comes in from Amanthis, who says, form a panel of customers or clients, including detractors, passives, and promoters, and invite them to share experiences with co-workers. So if you'd just like to complete the survey when you leave, the webinar would be great. And if you'd like to have a demonstration of the West product there and how that can improve the customer journey, just tick the demo option in the survey box as you leave the call. We'll have the webinar available from later on this afternoon. And just like to say thank you very much to our two speakers. Richard, thank you for joining us for your first webinar. Hopefully we can bring you back for another one.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
And Andre, thank you for getting up so early to join us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I love being here. Thank you, John T.
Okay, and just like to say thank you. We'll be back next week where we look at how to give the wow factor on email and chat. Thanks everyone, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you then. Bye-bye.